Sweet. Sweet Mr. Mevo. Figuring it out. Could be going.
You've come to a performance where nothing happens.
That's right. That's right. This is a variant. This is a minor variant on the original performance. We're just going to do things silently while you watch. Prepare for an artist talk. Okay, I think that's going live. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the second Saturday Artist Talk. This is going to be the last one that we host in this space, unless some insane miracle happens, which I'm not going to count on. I'm going to just expect that we're going to be moving on from this space and into a much better one sometime in the next couple of years. So my guest today is Torreya Cummings, who is Aggregate's last solo show in this space, ASG60. And we're going to talk about all things non-related to this exhibition. So those of you who have been to these may be a little surprised by the direction that it takes. These were always built to be a way to lend some legacy to the exhibition, more so than over-explain the exhibition or kind of talk through the exhibition. Now, there will be a moment for that at the end. I'll open it to questions. But I personally love the idea of looking back on this piece of audio and video maybe 5 or 6 years from now, when Torreya has gone on to great new heights, or Aggregate has gone on to great new heights, or there's totally different people involved with Aggregate, or this body of work has evolved into another body of work. And I like the idea of looking back and seeing what Torreya was thinking about at that period of time, what Torreya was evaluating in terms of histories and in terms of what this means. So I absolutely love if you ask questions at the end. But for a while, we're just going to chit-chat about silly things like the past and the future and, you know, the color pink.
Oh, yeah, I have some things to say about that. Actually.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do.
You want to start with the color pink?
I could do that, yeah. Has the context been?
I feel like, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. So, I guess originally this was developed to be a partner with the Oakland Art Room, who used to do artist talks on Saturdays. They don't really do that anymore, but yet we press on. So the idea is that people off the street could walk in and enjoy this without having a lot of context on what the art is and that sort of thing. So, I mean. This show, I guess the starting point and my accessibility point is landscape and the color pink.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, maybe I'll start with the color pink, which I have a long and difficult history with because, you know, like being a gender non-conforming child, you know, there's a lot of like, absolutely not, no way, I'm not doing anything with pink ever at all, no thank you, get lost. Right. And this has, you know, continued, I mean, to the point where like when I first moved to the Bay Area, I got a job as a landscaper with this like kind of amazing boutique lesbian landscaping, everything by hand, no power tools, hand pulling weeds, all organic, no chemicals, landscaping company. And my boss is this amazing woman who is like old school San Francisco, super like butch woman with like a little bit of a goatee and kind of long hair. And first day on the job, she hands me a pair of pink gardening gloves, and I say, I'm like, I don't know, 28 at this point. I'm like, do you have these in another color? And she just looks at me. She's like, honey, if I can do it, you can. Okay, sorry, thanks. But it's been interesting to have, and I'm kind of a little bit chromophobic personally, so not a lot of like, I like reflected light and sparkly things, but I don't really do like color personally. But in my work, it started, like part of what I'm interested in is this sort of like nightclub aesthetics and like drag performance and club lighting. And that started sneaking into the work that I'm making. And then sometimes it just works out that the color that you need to do something is not something I would like personally choose for myself, but it's what is required by the piece.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I mean, and I think it plays to the inverse of, you know, the piece in the theater deals with like a lot of inverted imagery, and I think you're inverting the landscape with pink and with the purples, and you're kind of working like just on a pure color.
Yeah. Well, and some of it's like this is really like hyper saturated, but like if you go out, like I've spent the last couple of years going on these early morning hikes.
I mean, so you say in your video, or in the short film that's in the theater, that you've always been kind of obsessed with landscape. Do you remember? I mean, you grew up in the Sacramento area, right?
Yeah, outside of Sacramento.
So what was that impetus like? Always is a very strong word to use.
Yeah, it is. Well, so there's sort of two sides of that. One is that you know, my parents are outdoors people and took me out into the outside from a very early age. Like my first backpacking trip, I was like 3 and I had my own little backpack, and I complained the whole time. But it sets a foundation for like this is, you know, landscape isn't so much about looking at it, but being in it and moving through it. And then also in Sacramento, you know, we would go on these school field trips to the Crocker Art Museum, and Crocker, of course, is one of the big 4 transcontinental railroad barons. And so in the Crocker Art Museum are all of these epic landscape paintings that are like super romantic and, you know, really emphasizing this story of westward expansion. Destiny. I didn't really get that as a kid, but I was just like, it's not like that, guys. and so there's this, and it was like, you know, I thought of it at the time as like, you know, really kind of like boring and wrong, and so when I started learning more about it and why these paintings, you know, came to be and what they were celebrating and how people were sort of romanticizing a recent past at the time, then I had, you know, more sort of nuance in my distaste.
And there's something really interesting about building art, you know, kind of a large part of your art practice out of your distaste for something that you also, you like it's not that you don't distaste the idea of landscape, you distaste that specific valuation of that period.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, does that spill into a contemporary version of landscape for you, or is it really just like that specific painting experience from going to a museum as a kid in Sacramento?
I mean, I think a lot of things have happened in landscape work since then that are way more nuanced and interesting, and you know, give a more I don't know, complete isn't necessarily the right word, but just a more interesting and nuanced view of the land and our interaction with it. So my beef is not really with that, and it is sort of odd to present, you know, a show based on this one painting that nobody probably remembers. Anyway, but that is, you know, a lot of my work comes from this place of love and ambivalence. And, you know, and the West in general, and sort of loving that landscape and that experience of being in it, but also dealing with the incredibly screwed up history of how we got here to be in this place.
Right. And we've talked about that. I mean, I think we talked about maybe one of our earliest conversations about what this show might be. You talked about like the love of this place, and I think you were, you know, talking about Donner Pass.
Yeah. And
like the love of, like your hatred of what happened there, but knowing that we wouldn't like our lives in this place and like the joys of San Francisco and the joys of the Bay Area, and like what this place has become is entirely based on that misery having to have had occurred.
Yeah.
That is so weird.
I mean, and part of it is this question of like, what do you do with this? I don't know.
Yeah.
And that was part of why with the performance, I didn't want to do something that was specifically historical. I wanted to do something about like being in the landscape now and imagining a way of, being more part of it more comfortably in the future. So I wanted to have this sort of historical foundation, and then this other thing is like the here and now, and the possible future.
So, so when I met you, I was actually kind of riffing on this with a few people on the opening night. Opening night was very full. Those of you some of you made it, and a lot of aggregate solo artists that have had solo shows here were here, and one of which was Ryan Jones, who was the fourth show here, and he hung a boat from the wall, and he had a studio in this building with us for a little while, like as we were kind of thinking about the gallery space, and I think at the time you guys worked together, right? At the Oakland Museum.
Yeah, the Oakland Museum.
And he drug me to your show at MacArthur B. Arthur, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And we went, and that was the first time I met you and the first time I saw your work, and that was really early 2012.
That sounds right.
Yeah, 7 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about what that piece was? I mean, just based on...
That piece was the exterior. It was like a little kind of boxy building that was basically supposed to look like an outhouse. And you could like peer through a crack and see this kind of infinity mirror box with lights and a disco ball and like hay on the ground. And I think it was called like Saturday Night Hay Fever. It might have had like a more like elaborate title, but that's how I always think of that piece, so that's the one that stuck. But a lot of the work that I was doing at that time, and still now, I think it's in there, is this like I grew up in a rural place. I have a love for that experience, but I also have like feelings of not belonging there, and so I take that experience and bring it into an urban environment where in some ways I feel more comfortable, but in other ways I don't. And so it's this kind of like how do you get these things to sit together, and that sort of difference of like these are inappropriate materials for this place. That's like the core of a lot of what I do.
Right, and I think I actually, like now, thinking about that, we may have met and talked that night, but I definitely met you at Root Division. Prior to that, you did a series of the cowboy photos.
Yeah.
For a show. I don't recall what the show was at Root Division, but
That
it was probably
was
2008 or 9.
Maybe.
Because it was still there. It was at the 17th Street.
Oh yeah. No, I think that was, well, if they're the photos I'm thinking of, those are from 2014.
That would have been after
so it would have been after
they moved. No, I swear you had at least one photo in a show. Maybe I have a
maybe
worse
there are
memory.
cowboys I don't remember, which is totally possible.
Maybe I'm conflating this. Never forget a cowboy. Well, so just
those are up at the Oakland Museum right now.
Really?
In the Queer California show.
Fantastic.
So it was just people were like, "Oh, these are amazing." I was like, "Cool, thanks. Where were you in 2014?"
Right. What so what started your I mean, you're probably going to answer this with the Crocker question, but like, what started your obsession with diorama? Because I feel like your sculptural work speaks to that at many different scales, and so does your photography work.
Yeah.
Like, obviously the piece that we just discussed at MacArthur B. Arthur, like the 2 out of 5 of the pieces in this exhibition are very kind of heavy diorama.
Yeah.
And I know that your piece at your 1-year installation at OMCA was a very full-scale walkthrough diorama.
Yeah.
You know, what is that about, creating that mixed space that is...
Well, I think, you know, there's some of this I blame on my parents, you know, where I went to like natural history museums and all of that kind of stuff as a kid. And there is something that and I find this in like drag performance too, where there's this sense of illusion, and then you can almost sort of believe it, but not quite, and you can see how it is put together, but for the moment that it feels real, it's exciting. But I also, yes, I think that like fakery is a way of, like it shows you that you're telling a story.
Right.
And I think lately I've been working a lot with ideas about like, is how I'm thinking about this information that I'm presenting, rather than just years, and actually got to work on actual dioramas, which is sort of a...
You were there during the rebuild of the science.
Yeah, which I didn't...
And the Bay Show, right? You lived.
And I was mostly doing graphics, so I was doing backdrops and wall murals and that kind of thing. I wasn't, like, I was always envious of the people who got to, like...
Carve a little man's hand.
Do all of the little, you know, fabricating all of the things that actually go in it. So I didn't want to do that. But it was still just, like, great to be kind of a part of that. But it did really get me thinking about, you know, how can I kind of use this in my own way for my own purposes.
What was your favorite piece that you worked on, like in the Bay Show?
In the Bay Show, I got to go out in a kayak and with a GoPro and take underwater, like, you know, half above, half below, like shots of various places, which, you know, that was kind of one of the amazing things about that time at that museum, was that I could kind of say, like, hey, I want to do this. And, okay, let's figure that out. Or like, we need something like this. I'm like, I know, I'll go out in a kayak.
I think I know 4 of you that were there at that time, and everybody kind of has that same experience. Like, and it's so funny that, like, I'm sure there are more than those 4 people that are working artists, but that was like a 2-year undertaking or 3-year undertaking, at least of the preparator side of things. Yeah. And the thought that it, like, infected all of these people's art practices is really an interesting proposition. That, like, that like there might, you know, like, there conceivably could be this school of people that worked on the Bay Show, and like the different directions with which they took their practice because of how infected they were by it. Like Jamie Lakatos and Jesse Walton and Jones. And,
well, I think that there are a lot of artists who work in museums, and for a number of reasons. One is that it's like, if you have construction skills that you've gotten from this part of your life, you can also apply them in a professional context with, like, smart, interesting people. So I think, like, I always thought of myself when I was there as, like, a secret artist in residence. And so I was like, oh, you've got a sound library. Can I get into that and get some of those field recordings? And like, oh yeah, of course. So I made a record out of field recordings from their archive. And I think, you know, a lot of people who work there think about it that way. And it's like, you're exposed to all of these things, and you know, hopefully as an artist with a day job, you find a way to make the day job relevant to your artwork, and those things can feed each other. Right. Ideally.
Ideally.
Not every job I've had has done that, but it's nice when it works.
What are some of your other jobs that maybe didn't, or fed it in a really strange way? Because right now you're at CCA and you're working kind of a little bit more behind the scenes and helping students. And You got your MFA there.
Yeah.
In ceramics or
sculpture.
Sculpture.
Yeah, I didn't do any. It's funny. I didn't do any ceramics or photography when I was there. And now I've worked those things back in.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but it is. It's one of the interesting things about working at CCA is that you're at this hub of activity where there's always sort of new voices and perspectives coming in, and there's talks you can go to, and so it's a great place to be exposed to a lot of ideas, and to work with people. I did teach there briefly for like one semester, and I was like, oh, this is really hard, actually. I think I'm just going to get a job.
What was the class?
Sculpture 1.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What did you find hard about it? Because you seem like a very patient, a person that you deal in specifics, and I feel like that's a strong characteristic of it.
Well, actually, at the time, what was really there's two parts. One, speaking in public is challenging for me, and so lecturing, like, I'm going to stand up here and talk for 45 minutes about this thing that you don't care about.
But you might someday.
That was a little awkward. And then also, I would get, like, it's emotionally draining, where it's like, you care about people and you want them to do well, and that it was hard for me to find a way to like put a boundary on that. And I think with more practice I probably would be better at that, but it was just sort of like, you get interested in how people are doing, and you want to help them, and at some point you're just like, well, you're 22 and you're going to do whatever it is that you're going to do, and hopefully you come to class and
right.
You're not late to the field trip. I don't have to go pick you up at the BART station. But I think I just did some studio visits with people at Mills, like grad students at Mills, and that was great. It was like really nice to talk to them about what they're doing. It was like, I could maybe see teaching again someday, but if it not like, the other part of that is like the hustle of trying to find like enough classes at enough schools, and like, I know, the nice thing about having like a job is that you know how much your paycheck is going to be every month.
Right.
And you know where it's going to come from.
Right. And it's not going to go away
It's not
in
necessarily going to go away in July. Yeah. I hope. My boss is here.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So yeah, back to the other question. So like, what are some jobs that like fed into your practice that were totally out of left field?
Let's see.
Or didn't feed into your practice at all?
Well, I had a job when I was in community college, taking care of a mouse colony to feed injured snakes.
Oh.
I was working at a little like wildlife rehab center, and
it was rehabbing the snakes, not the mice.
Rehabbing the snakes, not the mice. Yeah. Yeah. The first day on that job, somebody like asks me if I'm squeamish, and I was like, nah. I was raised by biologists. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
And they like picked up a mouse by the tail and bonked it on the table to stun it to feed to the snake. And they were like, "You still in?" I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'm fine. I can do this. It's all right." Yeah, that was, I was like 19 or something.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think the job that like did not really feed into the work, my own work, is like working as a cashier at Cost Plus.
Oh. Okay.
It was like, this is terrible. And there were people who were there for 25 years, and I was like, wow, I don't want to be here for 25 years.
Right.
Like, this is amazing that you can do that, but not for me. I gotta get out of here.
Right. So what was your path to art? I mean, what was your you went to community college, obviously.
I went to community college.
What did you study?
In Sacramento. I studied sculpture and history, and it was sort of like a general get your transfer lined up, and that's when I went to UC Davis after that, where I studied art and history, which I guess I'm still interested in.
That's amazing. That's a fairly clear path.
But it is like I did start out as a history major, and then at some point I realized like historians don't make any money either. And so if I'm really going to commit to not making any money, I should probably do what I really want to do, which is be an artist.
Yeah.
And also, like, I have so much respect for the level of diligence and rigor that goes into actual historical research.
Right.
And that's one of the things I say in this video. Like, I am not a historian. Like, I know that.
Right.
You know, like, I don't have footnotes for this. You know,
Right.
I don't have, you know, and I want to tell stories that are not necessarily going to be, like, I want to use that language and use some of those ideas, but I don't want to have to, like, strictly adhere to, like, this is a historical research project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
it's an art project with a historical angle.
Right. I think that's something we always had in common in our early conversations about, like, what it meant to show the kind of art that Aggregate's showing, and that it's like the opening of the book with no intention of closing it or even giving you like the page order.
Right.
You know, it's like how do you create an experience that is so far from finite in a finite place and time.
Yeah.
And I think you really embraced that. You know, and your first pitch was that there were several pitches for this side of the room early on, but the first pitch was the tunnel piece and the hole in the wall.
Yeah. And I wanted the way that it ended up working was kind of what I wanted to do, where there's this kind of like fun experience in the front, and then you eventually work your way around to the screening room, and then you come out and you're like, oh.
Not so fun.
Not as fun. And I think, you know, like, I go to a lot of places, and like when I went to the tunnels, like, there's graffiti in there, it's like a party spot, it's like fun, and there's not like a whole lot of information like right there about like why this is here.
Right.
And so I wanted to have that kind of like bouncing around experience where you're like, this is cool. Oh, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what strong history does, right? It kind of buries the nightmares. It, you know, like, you could look for them. But, you know, for the most part, you're trying to find access to, you know, humanity and the path of humanity. And I always think about this. I went to University of Maryland. I went to UC. I went to a university, a state school, and was forced to take a lot of electives those first 2 years that were outside of my major. And one of the history classes I took was a history of propaganda in Europe from, I think, 1910 to 1956 or something like that. And it was the weirdest class because it didn't address, it hardly addressed what the actual things that were happening in Europe on, but it really just addressed them through the posters that existed. And it was taught more like an art seminar with like,
really?
You know, the tests were slide tests, and you had to kind of know what that was and what that meant, and who, you know, what country of origin, the purpose, you know, what the reason. And it was like, some of the Nazi stuff was so bizarre, of like best Aryan head competitions that would happen in small villages, as like where they would find the guy with the best looking skull.
Oh, wow.
You know, and it's like looking at all of those horrors through this really bizarre, like, let's have fun with it kind of thing was just absolutely mind-blowing as a 22-year-old, you know, of like, you know, it's like you learn the horrors. Like, it's almost the opposite, right, where you spend this lifetime learning about the horrors of that, but then it's like these people were trying to make it work for them somehow, like under the worst possible circumstances. And again, like the idea that you're looking into these railroad barons trying to celebrate what they've done, hiring an artist that celebrated what they kind of wanted to celebrate.
Yeah.
You know? And then, you know, you
Well, and that was the funny thing about that painting was that I found, like, there's so many places, you know, mostly on the internet, where they say, like, oh, you know, and Collis B. Huntington didn't even like this painting. And I'm like, okay, I'm willing to believe that, but, like, how do we know?
right.
And I never really found any kind of, like, it's probably out there, and I probably just didn't find it. But, you know, I was looking for some kind of, like, you know, Albert Bierstadt, I'm disappointed in you. This is really not the angle I was hoping you would go for. I really wanted the train to be more in the center of the thing, and instead it's this footnote off to the side.
Right.
But I never, you know, it's like, I feel like sometimes research is you're just like putting your hand into the dark waters and you're like scooping things up, and you're like, okay. And then, like, maybe that's attached to something else, and then maybe that's attached to something else, and you're pulling this, like, net out of the water. But you can't say, like, oh, it's over there, I'm going to go get it.
Right. Did you take research classes when you were studying history? What was the kind of stuff that you were researching?
Well, let's see. I think it was actually the, if I remember, this was, like, 20 years ago. So it's, but, you know, anytime you write a paper, you have to have, you know, these are my sources, and this is why I think that, you know, how I'm putting these things together, and you have to be really transparent about it. You can't just, like, I think this. So you're like, who cares? Who are you?
Right, and it's pre-internet,
Yeah.
so you were in books.
Yeah, books and card catalogs and microfiche.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's awesome. Awesome. So,
And that's why I'm, like, really clear with this. Is like, this is not a history
right.
project. It's an art project.
Can you talk a little bit about refolding discomfort in landscape? Are you uncomfortable in the wilderness?
No.
Okay, but you just know people that are.
Yes.
And that was where the impetus of inviting people that are uncomfortable in landscape into your exhibition that is uncomfortable with landscape.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, I do, I have a high level of comfort and knowledge of the outdoors, and I feel like, you know, I don't have a great sense of direction, but I can navigate with a map and compass, and I can, you know, figure out where I am. But so that's, like, one point of anxiety. And then also, I remember hearing when I was in college about these women who had been murdered near the Appalachian Trail in the 90s, and they were lesbians. And there's this sense for me of, like, when I'm outside and I'm completely away from people, feeling like, oh, it's such a relief. And it's like, I don't have to worry about interacting with people, and it's so nice. And then I also think, like, who else is out here?
Right.
And why? You know, and if anything happened, would anybody find me?
Right.
So there is some, you know, I do have some anxiety about it, but not, it's, you know, overwhelmed with, like, I really just love it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I think there's, especially if you're, like, visibly different in some way,
right.
Than, you know, people who look like they should be outdoors. Like, so, or if you have, like, a medical situation,
right.
or, you know, like, one of the, in the brochure there, I selected some stories from people who, you know, were sharing, like, why they're uncomfortable in nature. There's somebody who gets seizures,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so he was always worried about, like, falling off a cliff.
Right.
And, or getting stuck somewhere where his, you know, people didn't know where he was. But a lot of people responded that they were not worried about nature so much as who else might be out there.
Right.
And feeling like in an urban space that they can be themselves, but in the outdoors they don't really know, like, how to be or how to survive or what to do, or or worried about being attacked.
Right. There's lack of security.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it was nice to, like, part of the reason that project was so interesting for me was I got to hear, things that I expected to hear, and then other things that I didn't expect to hear.
Mm.
So there was kind of a wide range of people's responses.
Mm.
So.
So just to swing back a little bit, do you that particular painting that spoke to you, that you built this whole exhibition about? Did you actually were in front of it at some point, or did you find it? Did you come across it?
I came across it in an art history class in undergrad. American paintings since 1850 or something, 1850 to 1900 maybe. And I was like, oh, this one is very specific about, like, because it is more or less celebrating the crossing of the Sierras by the Transcontinental Railroad. It sort of stands in for what a lot of that genre of work is doing, but it's like very concrete. It's like this particular moment.
Right. And it's also a place of substantial, disastrous history.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's incredibly beautiful.
Right. Which you address in your piece, which is like, I think, my favorite
I
part,
went
that
up
it bounces
there,
back and forth twice.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time up there just, in general, because it's close, and it's, I've been skiing up there and backpacking up there, but it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went back for research for this trip, or for this project, I stayed with some friends who live in Truckee, and I went in there with this, like, I am interested in dismantling the view as the primary way of understanding landscape. And I was like, holy shit, look at all of this.
Right.
Like, this is gorgeous.
Right.
So it's, so it's both.
Right.
But that's part of the ambivalence, again, where it's sort of like, I have thoughts about this, and also, like, I love being here. So.
Right. Right, but I think that's, like, thematically, we've already discussed that 3 or 4 times, that you love the superimposition. You love the putting a disco ball next to a pile of hay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's just like, I think a major theme of my life and of my work has been, like, I don't know which camp I'm in. Right. Like, I'm kind of all over the place in a number of ways, and so trying to find a way to, like, synthesize or fit things together, like, both can be true. Like that in between space is actually a space itself. That's where, like, I am and my work is. And
I feel like, again, we have that in common. Right. We called this aggregate space.
Aggregate space gallery.
Yeah, right. Right, which we may or may not drop the gallery upcoming, because it'll just be the space.
I mean, it is a space. It doesn't need to also be a gallery. It's both.
What's coming up next for you? Do you know? Do you have
I have
workings, residencies?
I do have a show, like a 2-person show in Sacramento next year at CSUS, in a space that is overwhelmingly large, so
nice.
That'll be interesting. I have been trying to think about, it's funny because, like, I love installation work and things that you can't buy, and performance sets that, like, this is not going in anybody's living room, But I've been for a while about something that people can take home with them. And usually that ends up looking like, a giveaway item or something. But, for this show, I made all of these photographs. And, what would it be like to do, a straight ahead, just, photo show?
Right.
I don't know. So that's something I'm thinking about. But it's not, I don't have a specific show that I'm working on in the near term. It's mostly starting to think about the show at Stack State.
Yeah, cool. But do you see Non-Jews from the Underground as a starting point, or do you feel like this was a coalesced a group of thoughts that you had, and now this kind of feels like a finished thing?
Well,
that
I
you
think
can move on from.
That there are, one of the things that I've been working with is figuring out how performance works into my overall thing, because part of the reason I was looking at landscape is that working with people is in a lot of ways difficult. And I was thinking, the Oakland Museum piece, there was no performance component because it was installed in a gallery. I was like, this is kind of nice, And then I was like, I'm just going to focus on landscape because there aren't any people in it. And then I was like, why are there no people in it? That's actually not how actual landscape is. And then I was like, I gotta do a performance piece. But I think
with no people in it.
Well, there are people in it. They're just not really, Well, it's just an aside. My mother came to the show, and her criticism of the performance piece was, well, I thought it was going to be about the Donner Party, and there wasn't any cannibalism.
Have to remember that for next time.
Next time.
More cannibalism.
Yeah. But I was like, I don't want to talk about the Donner Party at all. Lots of people have talked about the Donner Party.
Right, yeah.
Not that interesting. Other things that are, so, but thinking about performance is something that I, one of the primary things that I'm interested in with performance is that my performers feel good about it. And feel good about participating, and that it's a valuable experience for them, because I work typically with people who are not professional performers. And so it's important to me that they feel good about the experience. And every time I do a performance piece, I learn more about, I don't have a background in performance, I don't have training, or I just have I would like to see what this looks like.
Right.
And I would like to work with these people and develop something.
I've only ever seen one of your one other performance which you led and performed within. The Signal Tower.
Oh, yeah.
Which was beautiful and startling and strange, and the whole scenario was super strange, and that was is that worth describing?
Sure, yeah. It
was life-changing for several of us that were in that room, so.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It was, I've done some work with this curator who will every once in a while, hey, I've got keys to this building I'm not supposed to be in. Do you want to do something? Yes.
Yeah.
But also, if you're thinking about, and I think for that, when I was originally invited to do an installation, it was access is tricky. Moving a lot of stuff in is tricky. It's only up for one night, and I might not be able to get any of it back. So maybe we should do a performance piece instead. But it was at this old naval signal tower on Yerba Buena Island that has since been demolished.
Oh, it has.
Oh, yeah.
I was just talking about it yesterday with somebody.
Yeah, it's long gone.
Man.
But you had to climb in through a hole in the floor, under the porch and up into the space. And I set it up with a sort of makeshift smoke machine and a bunch of LED lights around so that the whole thing would kind of glow, and then had people in sort of sailor outfits holding mirrors and bouncing a laser around, like a green laser in different patterns that were sort of numerically based.
Right. And as an audience member, we came in, what, like 10 or 12 at a time, and we're around this circle in the dark in this creepy building that we just climbed through a hole in the floor to get into. And the building is making noise, like it is. There's a reason that building's demolished. It's because it was barely standing, and it was 4-story.
Yeah.
It was a 4-story building that was about maybe 16 feet by 16 feet. Most of it was the stairs.
Yeah.
And
it
moved.
At the top.
You know, I mean, you could feel it moving. Especially when you got to the top, it was moving 2 or 3 inches, like every 5 or 6 seconds.
Yeah.
And
but you could see all of the bridges.
Yeah.
In the bay.
I mean, you can see everything. It is
Yeah.
absolutely insane. And there was an active speakeasy that was up there for God knows how long that people would show up in and have parties in, and then they took the building down. Yeah. But yeah, but the piece was like you speaking, and then this group of people trying to make this pattern, which had to happen obviously in perfect order because every mirror moved the laser to the next position.
Right. Yeah.
And so there was this minor struggle.
Weather report was playing.
Oh, right.
Also.
And it was just like this minor, like watching this minor struggle of trying to create this thing as a group in silence.
Yeah.
And then until you signaled for the next part to begin.
Yeah.
And it was really peculiar and wonderful.
Very peculiar.
It was wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, I was interested, and that was again like I like to avoid people trying to act. Like I don't want people to necessarily be forced to be themselves, but I also don't want them to have to pretend to be something they're not.
Okay.
So the space of like finding an action for people to do has been pretty generative. So it was a series of actions that people were undertaking. And I think, you know, metaphorically it goes off in a number of directions, but the actual activity was like, sort of, they knew what they were trying to do, but with the mirrors and the lasers, like if you move it a little bit, a lot happens. Right. So trying to like hold still enough and then direct it in the right way, and then like there's no acting there. Like they're actually like doing a thing.
Right, that's difficult.
It's difficult.
Yeah, in a swaying building with swaying hands.
Yeah, and that is something I think about as an artist with having had opportunities to do that kind of work, where it's like, you know, this kind of clandestine, surreptitious thing with a lot of moving parts versus like doing a show at the Oakland Museum, where you have to think about everything that you're doing like a year to 6 months in advance.
Right.
You know, it's like a totally different kind of set of parameters.
Right.
And like, how do you get the energy from this weird, scrappy thing that you're doing in a marginal environment into a space that is, you know, specifically designed to support artists?
Right.
You know, it's like, it's a very different thing. And I don't know that it's always, you know, there's something about crawling through a hole in the floor that sets you up for an experience that walking through the main doors doesn't do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and just to go back to that a little bit, like this show, we've been super lucky with our funders thus far. I mean, this is an NEA funded show and a Warhol funded show and a Zellerbach funded show. And they all were very okay with us not having a huge plan.
Yeah.
And so far, amazing. all of our funders have, you know, it's taken a long time for us to get them, but we're in this position where they trust that what is going to happen with the aggregate staff and with our facilities and with the artist will coalesce in a way that will make something that is unique and site specific to whatever site aggregate is. And again, I feel like I didn't we didn't nail the showdown until
Oh my God.
2 weeks before the show. I mean, I think,
I
and there were decisions, pretty big ones, that were made right up until the end.
Yeah.
But it's like, I feel like it couldn't happen any other way. I mean, with most shows, I mean, even Layla Weaver's show, which was largely heavily planned out, was, I mean, that video was being tweaked the day of. You know, that was, there were things about that exhibition that just folded right in at the end. And so I hope that we can keep that world alive, you know, with Aggregate. But it's been an absolute pleasure to collaborate and be a part of this.
Thanks.
You
Yeah,
did an awesome
likewise. Job. Well, I just really appreciate your trust, because this was all kind of forming around December, January, and with an install starting March 27th, and it's that is a short timeline. I do not like a timeline that short,
right.
You know. But it was sometimes the idea train, you know, it's just come on, kids, get in the car, we're leaving. We need ideas. Let's do this, you know. And I know kind of generally what I'm thinking about, but how does that work into a specific ceramic object that has a firing schedule that I have to work around,
right.
You know, other people in the space and what time they can fire things, and
right.
you know, I've got to get this to the framer, and I've got to get to the Donner area in between storms,
Right.
so that I don't get stuck in the snow. So there was a lot of kind of compressed timelines with this one, and I just really appreciate your trust and you will figure it out. I believe it.
Yeah. You did.
I did.
Yeah. We helped where we could.
Yeah, no, you were a tremendous help.
I am going to open it up to questions. I'm going to make a couple of announcements first. So, number one, announcement number one. This show is open until May 11th. Please send people. We're going to do a couple of Friday events. We're involved with this really fancy thing called Oakland Art Route, which is going to be similar to San Francisco's Passport program, where a bunch of Oakland tourists are going to get a little thing that they have to stamp at every gallery in order to get a $1,000 gift certificate. So the last 2 weekends of the show are going to be full of a lot of confused people just trying to get a stamp.
I was trying to get a stamp.
Yeah, you might want to be around just to see that unfold. You know, this you know, being our association with the Oakland Armor is really, really wonderful, because almost every other venue is a proper gallery that has things for sale, and so we very often get people that walk through the door and say, "What is this? Is this it?" At every show. So it's great. It's going to be a really awesome opportunity to have 1,000 of those people come through in 2 weekends and just be baffled. So thanks for being a part of that.
Sure.
And then immediately up after that, we're gonna do one last Orium. So those of you who don't know about Orium, this is the third year we're doing it, and we invite artists to come and use Aggregate shop to make specific pieces of artwork that then get sold between $100 and $500 during an event and an exhibition. So it is a more traditional art selling event, but it's also, to us, it embodies what we do here, which is this place where the ideas become reality within this place. So this building will be already in. It will start to be taken apart at that point, so there'll be holes in this wall, and there'll be some other things going on. And we'll be building towards totally removing everything that's in here at the beginning of July, which leads me to the other big announcement. Anyway, so those dates are from May 16th to June 6th, and the evening of the 7th is when we're going to kind of have a big party. And then that show will be up until June 15th. And then the really, really big announcement is we're going to have a 2-day fundraiser on July 2nd and 5th. I know it's a week that a lot of people are out of town. It's also a week when a lot of people are going to be available to do some crazy stuff. So July 5th is going to happen in this facility. It will be the last first Friday that this building is open. There will be a series of music performances, possibly some film, possibly some insane installations, and that building's going to become. That event's going to be called Spaceship, because Aggregate's taken off. And then on July 2nd in San Francisco, Z Space has super generously agreed to host our kind of basically kickoff to what we're hoping to be a $50,000 fundraiser. We're going to call that 10 Forward. We're going to be thinking about the next 10 years. It is a Star Trek reference, for those of you that are fans. But the idea of we're going to sell seats to a 250-person theater and have a series of short lectures and film and performances in one night with a bunch of drinks and a paddle raise. And we're going to be trying to organize that as heavily as possible and try to have a real good footing for this this build-out. Aggregate is not closing. We have really big news about where some of our shows that are going to happen for the rest of this year are going to be. They're all going to be all over. Some in Oakland, some in San Francisco. We're trying to make some even larger relationships for 10, 15 years down the road. And it's all happening because of our community. And so, but what we don't have right now is money. So we're full of ideas and we're full of effort and we're full of energy. And we're going to just keep pushing through this. And if you know people that are feeling generous, send them our way. And we'd love to include them and work forward with that. And especially anybody that knows that July 2nd date, please save it. I'd love to see all you guys there to support and cheer us on and take a look at some of the artists that are coming up in the next couple of years. So, thank you, Torreya.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Torreya or myself? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's very important for people to be saying, hey, this attitude towards landscape is still going on. I was just wondering what you think about like desert festival culture as a way, you know, like people projecting themselves onto a space that they think of as gloriously empty and they can do literally how they want in it. Like, I don't really know. I've never actually been to one of those things except for Kate's, which is very different. Do you think, like, how do you think that's different than what you see?
Oh, that is a good question. I think, you know, especially with the deserts, there are many and they're different. There is this idea that like nothing is out there, and it's not true. There's lots going on out there. And I do think, you know, visually, like it's very striking to, like, drop something into a very different environment. But, you know, I have not been, I mean, again, like I've only been to the Mojave Sound Art, which is a lot more about like being in a space and listening to it and being not stepping on burrows and like being very aware of what routes you're taking through the landscape and it is more about like widening your sense of like attention and experience, which I feel like is very different than like, here's a thing you can take a selfie with.
Well, I guess maybe selfie culture is also 19th century landscape. I mean, it's me backdrop.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that, you know, that problem is 100% current. Like, hasn't moved at all. It's just, but it's a good place to start because it's a big stunning image. But I don't think it's old.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, that is part of like in the video I included the photo of people taking selfies because I think that is a lot of how, you know, we spend a lot of time in those places trying to like crop people out of the frame or crop the telephone poles out of the frame. And I wanted to look at like what it is actually like, which is you are one of a number of people who's trying to make everyone else invisible. But I do think that a lot of the sort of festival thing is about it's a different kind of visibility, maybe, where it's like, I was here, instead of there's nobody here, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's the difference?
I think it's different, but I think it is, it's not necessarily engaging with the place in a more, in a different way.
Right. I mean, do you see landscape as only a negative? I shouldn't even say that. Do you see landscape as predominantly like a negative as an idea, like capital landscape?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there are, I tend to be more interested in work that is about sort of experience and being inside of a space, mm-hmm. and trying to understand it better and trying to understand its systems better.
Right.
And I have, I'm not really doing curatorial projects right now, but I would love to at some point do an alternative landscape show where it's because there are a lot of people who are working with kind of other approaches.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that sort of capital L view, thinking of, looking at a landscape as ownership and triumph over it, mm-hmm. and I think that is particularly celebrated in those 19th century paintings. Mm-hmm. And I do think the times when I have stood in a place with somebody who owns property in a rural place, mm-hmm. There is usually a conversation that's my property line goes from that ridge over to that ridge, over to that tree over there, over to here, and then back along the highway. And it's all about just marking, everything you can see is mine.
Right.
Or almost everything you can see is mine. Right. And I think that idea doesn't, and maybe those landscape paintings, the capital L ones from the 19th century, is all of this is ours.
Right.
But it is very much about ownership and control and resources. And also it's really beautiful, but it is ours.
Right. Right. You may look at it.
You may look at it.
Right. Here's a painting to remember.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Anybody have anything else? Yeah.
This is maybe more of an observation, but when I was watching the video, that kind of first part where you proclaim that you're not an artist or you're not an instrument, and at first I was oh, that's an interesting gesture for an artist, because does an artist need to kind of proclaim that? But I think as the video went on, one of the things I was thinking about was that it really was about building up this space of an untrustworthy narrator, and particularly because it seems like so much of the conversation around landscape is about landscape, but also just the kind of construction, the use of landscape to construct particular facts about history and about bodies, and even thinking about the kind of insertion of the narratives of Chinese laborers, which is all about American capital and building capitalism off of the erasure of particular bodies of labor. And so it's interesting to see that in relationship to this, which I think is one of the more, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but one of the kind of installations you've done that's really more about also exposing the seams of that. So there's this whole theme of untrustworthiness that's kind of running through that seems a little bit more prominent in this work, but also because it seems like it's very much about the presentation of particular bodies. It's this really troubling kind of gesture.
Yeah, I'm glad that came through.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those early conversations again we had was about unveiling this discomfort and unveiling which we spoke about already during this talk, but finding those moments where you can just break it apart, break apart that beauty and show the misery. And what I do love that about the videos piece is that again, as a non-researcher, you're listing how impossible it is to nail down just some peculiarities can you get a depth figure within 75%
Yeah.
of accuracy? And
Yeah.
you can't.
And that really highlighted, like, you know, we document things that we think are important, and we don't necessarily document other things. So how many people died? Not important.
Right.
How much did we pay them? Very important.
Right.
You know, so it's like they've got payroll figures in depth.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, and I think I was just, you know, I was revisiting my personal artist statement, you know, for a number of reasons, and my art practice was largely about kind of doing the same thing within science research. So the idea of kind of uncovering that we trust, like scientists as researchers, just like historians, their job largely isn't to create the package. Their job is to find out as much as possible, and the part that they hate is the distillation of the package, you know.
Sure.
And so like this idea that you know, like as a historian, you might have to try to nail that down and get some accurate figures, but as an artist, you're allowed to proclaim that it can't be found easily, and that it's unreliable. All of it's unreliable.
And this, like, you know, most of the research that I did for this, besides like just physically being in the place, was on the internet, and that means that it's only there if somebody decided to put it there. Right. You know, and there are a lot of reasons why information is not put on the internet, and there are only some things that I have access to. Right. And I wanted this video to be more about, like, you know, I am in this realm, I am more or less a layperson, but I am interested in these ideas and I want to find out more, and this is my experience of trying to find out more. And these are some of my thoughts about that. And I didn't want it to be like completely like an information dump or a book report, but I also wanted, you know, it's like, this is some information that you should be aware of, and you should think about this while you're looking at the other work. Yeah, the landscape thing, I was actually, I should have mentioned this earlier, but it just came to mind, which was, I had, there was a really nice interview that I did with KQED in the fall, and the social media sort of headline for that, I was described as an interdisciplinary landscape artist. I was like, that's new to me, you know, but that was part of why, when I was thinking about this show and what to do for this show, I was like, maybe I'll check that out. You know, like, I do have thoughts about this. And I do, there is an angle that is like that, but I had never really thought of my work in that light. So I think it was like sort of an accident, but also like a productive one.
Cool. Dorothy?
I mean, I could ask it after, because it's about really old work. Like,
No, let's get it on record.
It's, okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. You're part of the difference.
Well, no, because I think another thing you might notice, I've been following your work for a while, and one of the things is also constraint, because when you're not building out a natural like landscape or a quasi-natural landscape, you're working within, such as sailors, an architecture that might, I don't know what it is, and I guess really I'm selfishly asking, because one of my favorite works is Manifest Clandestiny, where you did work clandestinely in the defenestration building, which again, that building doesn't exist anymore.
Doesn't exist anymore.
And I remember that was probably one of the most precarious exhibitions I've been in, because it
The
you even
staircase
said, you're like,
collapsed.
hey everyone, be careful, don't want anyone to get tetanus. But I think that the kind of contrast of the photography that you actually took in the place, if you could describe it for people that weren't there, I mean, it was quite glamorous, and I think that's what you mentioned. You see, and that seems to show up in your work, even in the Sailor's piece, even in, I mean, I was like, I also really so wanted to participate in Hard Rocks, and I couldn't. I love that work too, but yeah, if you can speak to very much the opposite of growing up in nature.
Yeah.
And so I remember that was one of the things that really stuck with me. That exhibition really stuck with me because it was like the detritus of the city, and it was a building that no one cared about. And it had some very fascinating, installation on the outside of it, like furniture.
Yeah.
The appearance of furniture being thrown out. But then when you go inside to this exhibition, it's just like, holy shit, it's really glamorous, made up. Like the photographs were beautiful, but equally just seeing the detritus then of the shoots themselves. So if you could like talk about the contrast of building out these, again, quasi-natural landscapes and working in that constraint of a synthetic environment.
I hadn't totally thought about those things in the same like box, but I do. That piece I was working with trans and gender nonconforming friends and acquaintances, and doing these kind of like, sort of like, yeah, they're glamorous. Like, I wanted to represent people in a way that they felt really like good about, and we were doing it in this building and that was falling apart. And that was another case where like we were not supposed to be there, and to this day it was a little like, hope he doesn't watch this. The artists who had relationships were strained, let's just put it that way, when we did eventually get busted by the police and the stairway partially collapsed on the last night. But I do, like, that project was thinking about, like, you get this architecture that you have to figure out how to interact with and embody. And the architecture could be, like, the body that you're born with, or it could be the building that you're inhabiting. And thinking about those, like, how else can we use this space? And one of the, when I'm working with people, it's really important to me that I am acting as an advocate in some way for the people that I'm working with. Because ultimately, like, they are in photographs, anybody can see these photographs, and I don't want to, like, further marginalize or other people who are already in that space. And so part of the way that I try to deal with that is, like, just, like, make people look really good. And, like, maybe that means embodying a character, or maybe that means developing a character with them, or but I don't want to, because I am conscious, like, this is work that is, like, available to a broader audience. It's not just, like, work available to my peers. And so that has really informed, like, how I think about, working with people, and also with, these structures that, like, I wanted to, that's the stuff I want to glamorize.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like it's still part of that greater museum experience that you had of trying to put things in a better light, or in the best light possible through varied techniques of presentation.
Yeah. And there are some things that I want to, like, and I think that's, something that came up with this, like, landscape project, is, like, I'm interested in kind of de-glamorizing these paintings, and also, like, putting that sort of romance and attention on, places that I want to put it. There's a lot going on out there.
With that, thank you all for coming, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes gathering this room back up and restoring the installation to where it belongs.
Turn the water feature back on.
We'll turn the water feature back on, and some of the sound work. And please help yourself to snacks and mimosa. One last thing, since this is the last time we're doing this. The very first time we did this was for an exhibition called April 11th, 1954, the most boring day in history. And it was a show that we put together just because we read an article about April, like that there was a whole computer database that, a computer algorithm that tried to dig through all the news history of the 20th century and find the day with which the least happened on. And it was April 19th, 1954. So we thought we should just invite artists that make kind of work that is about blandness to put a show together, and we ended up with poet Brent Cunningham and James Tanton, who used to live in the Bay, and Brian Wasson, who used to live in the Bay, and Josh Pieper, who used to live in the Bay. And I invited all these guys to do this artist talk. I was like, hey, we're gonna launch this thing, nobody has to come. And Josh Pieper, who now co-hosts the Kunstcapades podcast, who you should listen to this coming week because Torreya and I and Willis are gonna be on it this evening. So this very first artist talk, I invited all these people, and Josh said he'd do it, and he's a little camera shy and said, I'll only do it if everybody else is doing it. I'm like, that's fine. Everybody said yes. The morning of, everybody pulled out except Josh, who came with his wife and a friend from out of town, and he's like, I don't really want to do this. And I was like, well, let's just have mimosas and let's see what happens. Like, let's just record this silly thing. And it went so far off the rails. Like, we were talking about baseball, we got a little drunk. It was like 45 minutes. We talked a little bit about the work, but for the most part just bullshitted about really strange things and made jokes about like the presentation of putting on a performance. And it like set this tone that this could be as loose as it needed to be, or as specific as it needed to be, or it could be as much about the artist as possible, or as much about the way the exhibition is as possible. And I owe a lot to Josh Pieper for that, and Robin's here, she was at the very first one, and it's going to be sad to see it go. You can find that on our Vimeo page. It was recorded in such poor quality with like no audio recording, so you can barely hear what we're saying, but it is still outrageously silly.
If you want to blackmail Conrad, just
yeah, it just is very silly. So thank you all for being here for this last Second Saturday Artist Talk here. They will return, undoubtedly, someplace
thanks for
else.
making it out on a
Gorgeous, stinking day.
Beautiful
Yeah.
Saturday morning to sit in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect.
Well, I drank it all.
That's perfect. It might just be a little smelly. Oh, you could help stack chairs up. That'd be great. Thanks, man.